Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah talk. In synagogue this Saturday, we will be reading the double portions of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, often known as the Holiness Code. And I wanted to look at the Holiness Code this year, particularly with an eye towards how the Torah is asking us to interact in the world, what our place, our role is in the world, as it relates to holiness, as it relates to our mission as the Jewish people, and particularly at moments like these, right? As we're hopefully, God willing, coming towards the end of an international pandemic, as we are coming off of a very emotional week when it comes to justice for people of color and as well as for police officers and how policing is done and how to keep our cities both healthy and prosperous and safe after a series of acts of gun violence that have us again questioning what's the proper approach to gun ownership and gun rights, and which really raises fundamental questions about America, since those questions are in the Constitution, the Second Amendment. A lot of questions, and the question that I want to focus on today is: so what does Kedoshim tell us? What does the Holiness Code tell us about the Jewish place in the world, particularly in chaotic times? Now, to explore that question, we're going to focus in on the second verse in the Parsha of Kedoshim, which says, Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be Kodesh, usually translated as holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now, this is a backbone, fundamental idea of what it means to be Jewish. The question is, as is always the question when we come to the word holy or Kodesh, is what exactly does that mean? I kind of like know it when we see it. You can say sacred, but what does sacred mean? And there's a lot of commentaries that try and figure this out. The normative view, the mainstream view, is that Kodesh means to be separate. And so, for example, Rashi, the most prominent of medieval commentators, sort of the godfather of biblical exegesis, he says that that's what it means. And because there's a lot of rules about sexual activity, forbidden relationships, and whatnot, right in that section of the Holiness Code, he says it means to be separate, particularly separate when it comes to forbidden sexual relationships. But I want to actually focus in on another point of view, and that's the point of view of Nachmanides, known as the Ramban. The Ramban asserts, okay, Rashi's idea is good, but it's too limited. What the Ramban says, a very famous comment, is that what to be Kodesh means, to be holy, as opposed to keeping all of the other mitzvot, right? You would think, keep all the mitzvot in the Torah, and you're going to be holy. The Ramban says, no, that's not enough. That ultimately, you can be naval lifnei mishurat hadin. You can be a scoundrel within the line of the law, a scoundrel with the permission of the Torah. What does that mean? So the Torah says, starting with Rashi's comment, that we can have sex, that we should, it's important, as part of human being, and be fruitful and multiply. However, says the Ramban, the Torah gives us parameters, right? A marriage, literally called Kedushin, right? A Kodesh relationship in which to have our sexual relations, and that we need to limit it to that. To be Kodesh is not to run around promiscuously, but to limit our sexual activity within the confines of monogamy, of a Kodesh relationship. And he goes on to list point after point that's like this. The Torah says you can eat, but you shouldn't be a glutton. The Torah says that you can drink for sacramental purposes, right? But you shouldn't be a drunkard. right? The Torah says we can speak. We should speak. There's prayers we need to say. There's testimony. There's all kinds of important words to say. But we shouldn't be gossipers, right? And so on and so forth. And it goes through all these things. And the Ramban, and this is brilliant, by the way. I think that's exactly what this means, right? Our interaction in the world needs to be more than just. It needs to be more than only keeping the mitzvot. That's important. But it's not enough. You can do a lot of damage within the bounds of the mitzvot. The Ramban is saying we need to be good for goodness sake, for God's sake. That's holiness. Not just being doing what the Torah says we're allowed to do. There's plenty of ways to be a scoundrel within the permissions of the Torah. In addition, though, and this is where I think I start to diverge from the Ramban and where we come back to this idea of how we are supposed to interact in the world, the Ramban chalks up this idea of being separate in this way to the Prushim, a group of people in the Talmud known as the Prushim, translated into English often as the Pharisees. In modern ideas, we believe these were the proto-rabbis, the predecessors to the movement of the rabbis as we know them. And he says Prushim means to be separate. These are the ones who tried to go above and beyond the permissions of the Torah, to be better, to represent goodness in the world, holiness in the world. But he goes and takes that even a step farther. Right? He says, now he's talking about washing hands. He says, for although these washings and perfuming of the hands are mitzvot of rabbinic origin, yet Scripture's main intention is to warn us of such matters, that we should be physically clean and ritually pure and separated. Remember, Kodesh, Parush, separated from the common people who soil themselves with luxuries and unseemly things. Now, to some extent, Nachmanides is right. We need to separate ourselves, surround ourselves with good people, with pure people, with people who are pursuing spiritual pursuits the way we are. That's what we try and do here at WJC, right? It's a spiritual home, meaning a spiritual home base to be with like-minded people trying to bring more holiness into the world. However, I'm afraid when we see that we take it to too much of an extreme, right? Take it to a point of isolationist, right? That we should not allow ourselves even to be exposed to other people who are not up to our standards. And we all know communities that isolate themselves both within the Jewish community and beyond that to them holiness means be isolated, be apart. But I think that also misses a part of who and what we are supposed to be as the Jewish people in the world. Right? If we completely isolate ourselves from others, well, then we're not really representing holiness in the world. Maybe in our little community, but not in the world. Which brings us back to that pasuk that the Ramban is commenting on. Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, which we usually translate as, you shall be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. What does that really mean? Are we supposed to be like God? I guess so, but it's clearly an impossible goal. Maybe it means something a little different. Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy, ki, so that, ki kadosh Adonai Elohechem, so that I, the Lord your God, will be holy, or at least called holy. Or of course, God is holy. But right, you will be my representatives in the world, Jewish people. You will be holy. You will represent holiness in the world so that the holiness of God will be in the world. That is the mission of the Jewish people. It comes from here. So on the one hand, yes, Nachmanides, we need to go above and beyond what the Torah allows us to do to understand that there's goodness and right in separateness even from the things we're allowed to do, to bring a higher ethic and morality into the world in all of those gray spaces. But also, we shouldn't separate ourselves so much that we're unable to represent God in the world, represent holiness in the world. That is our job, and that is especially our job right now. Right? In difficult times, in crazy times, that is when the representation of holiness, of separateness, of a higher moral level is most needed in the world. And let's face it, Judaism is an old religion. We are an old people, and we have seen a lot of this stuff, all of it. Right? Ein chadash tachat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. We've seen plagues aplenty. Sadly, unfortunately, we have seen people oppressed and put down based on their nationality or their religion or their ethnicity or their race. None of that is new. Often we've been those people. Sometimes we've witnessed it in others. Right? We've lived through so many times when those with power, those with weapons, those who were able to oppress, those who were weaker have taken advantage of that. And through it all, we have represented a better way. Yeah, I'm waiting it. A better way. Those things are wrong. Right? We have represented the balance. And that is exactly what Kedoshim needs to mean to us. A balance between piety in its best sense, going above and beyond, being moral, representing, modeling morality in the world, and being part of the world in order that God's presence can be better known and everyone's standards of morality can be lifted. It's the role we have always played. It's not always been welcome by the peoples of the world, but it's a role we've always played, and it's a role that is called on as much now as ever. We need to engage in whatever ways we're comfortable with, in the ways that the Torah teaches us. We need to teach and grow and advocate for justice, for safety, for sensible medical measures, for ways to keep our children safe in the world, despite there being powerful weapons about. The Jewish people's job is to be kadosh, separate, but separate as an example, not separate as aloof and uncaring and isolated. Our prayers, we go into the weekend of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, is that we are able to do just that in times when the seichel of the Jewish people, in times when the wisdom of the Torah, the morality, and the ethics of it are needed more than ever. May we represent those well in the world. May we engage with others in order to make the world better, safer, happier, holier for all.